Hello and welcome to the third installment of my grading of all of the expansion cards in Terraforming Mars. This is the second episode on Venus Next. As always, if you want insight into the grading system, check out the description or click on the link in the top right hand corner to get to the first video where I explain it all. If you want to know how I go about ranking the expansion cards compared to the base game cards, check out the first video of rating expansion cards, which is linked in the description. But let's get started. We start off today's episode with Comet for Venus. This card is easily compared to Water to Venus. Both are space events with no other tags that increase the Venus parameter by one step. You pay 2 MC more for Comet and in exchange get to destroy 4 MC from one of your opponents. If it were just that, Comet for Venus would always be 2 MC better than Water to Venus, at least in 2P. But it has two problems. The biggest one first. The targeted opponent needs to have a Venus tag. If that isn't the case, Comet for Venus is just straight up worse than Water to Venus and not really worth playing, except if you have tons of combo potential, which there is for space events, or if you really need the Venus bump, since it's still 1 MC cheaper than a standard project and can be paid for with titanium. The second problem appears in 3P and above. Hate cards are just not as useful there. You pay 2 MC more compared to Water to Venus and one opponent loses 4 MC. The third or fourth or fifth opponent is happy. Also, you might not know which opponent you're competing with for first place, and even if you know, you might not be able to hit him if he doesn't have a Venus tag. So, where to place Comet for Venus? I think it's an average card that is useful in going for Venus or when you have space event combo potential and you're going for a long game. I think C tier is the perfect place to put it. It's definitely better in 2P than in 3P, and this ranking is primarily based on 2P. Corroder Suits is a worse sponsors. Why? Because it grants the same amount of prot as that card, and its only upside is a random Venus resource. The problem is that most Venus cards that such a resource is super valuable on are unlocked either in the very late game or not at all. Sure, another animal on Stratbirds or Venusian animals is great, but at the point you get them down, you do not need more MC prot. And if you want to play Corroder Suits early on for the prot, it either does not grant a resource, in the very likely case that you don't have a usable card for it, or the resource it grants is not worth that much, like half a card on area mappers or half a power prot on Deuterium Exports. And these are already the best case scenarios. So on average, Corroder Suits is just not that great. Is it bad enough to be downgraded a whole tier from sponsors? I don't think so. It's alright to play in the early to mid game if you have any Venus card that collects resources, and therefore is probably a low C tier card. Why is Dawn City often considered to be a good card? If you factor in the cost of the power prot it eats up as 7 MC, it costs only 3 MC less than Phobos Space Haven and yields exactly the same result, but with a 4 science tech requirement. I ranked Phobos in D tier, and that's not where I'm going to put Dawn City. First of all, science combos really well with an engine strategy, with a lot of titanium prot and space discounts. So getting both enough science tags to fulfill the requirement and titanium to pay for the card often comes hand in hand. That means that the requirement is less of a factor than you think. Then, and this is connected to the first point, there are two cards that make playing Dawn City much easier and much cheaper: Mass Converter and Quantum Extractor. If you get these down, not only do you automatically have to fulfill the requirement for Dawn City, you also get a space discount and you get a lot of power prot very cheaply, meaning that you do not in fact pay 7 MC for the power prot that this card uses up. This makes Dawn City a much better combo payoff for a science and engine player than Phobos ever was. It's quite a good mid to late game titanium dump, and I will place it in B tier. It can't be higher in my opinion, since it is absolutely useless for a rush player, but it's definitely a threat in the draft. There are not many genuinely good floater cards in Venus Next. Too many of them are either too expensive for what they do or too slow, even for an engine strat, and entirely useless in a rush. Deuterium Export is one exception. This card does something that is useful in any strat. It grants power production and can grant quite a lot over the course of a game. It costs the same as geothermal power, but can easily grant double the amount of power prot. You might say that production is best played early on, and with geothermal you get the prot instantly, while with Deuterium Export you need to wait 3 frickin' gens until you have achieved the same outcome. Yes, that's true, but power prod, in contrast to other production types, can be useful at all stages of the game, all due to power-hungry cards. You might want to play a city card or any other payoff in the late game and need power prod even in the last gen. Also, getting more than one power prod at once can sometimes even be a disadvantage. There are very few cards that instantly use up more than one power prod, and if you leave one just sitting there, it can get tapped. This means Deuterium Export has another upside compared to geothermal. Lastly, it holds 3 tags, and while the power tag is generally useless except if you're playing Thorgate, the Venus tag helps with Venophile, and the space tag means that this card can be discounted heavily and paid for with titanium. Also, 3 tags on one card make Deuterium Export one of the absolute best cards for Diversifier. Overall, I'd put this card in low B tier, as it's just genuinely good value. This next one is another floater collecting card, but this time it's not as universally great and instead much more specific to one strategy. Dirigibles needs to be included in a Venus strategy most of the time, since the card itself grants a currency that can only be used to pay for Venus tax. If you combine Dirigibles with other floater cards like Aerial Mappers, Deuterium Export or Floating Hebs, you can also ignore the whole Venus combo and just go for that. But still, since most floater cards are pure engine pieces, Dirigibles is an engine card at heart and a Venus card at least most of the time. And therein lies the problem. It grants good value and okay flexibility, but only for one strategy. If you go for a rush or just not for Venus, then Dirigibles is often quite useless. If you make use of it, Dirigibles pays off in 4 gens instead of acquired companies 5, and offers that extra flexibility of being able to use the floaters for other stuff. But all in all, I'd still put it somewhere in C tier. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know in the comments whether you agree with my ratings, or if not, how you would have rated them differently. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and consider subscribing. And lastly, please check out my Twitch and my Twitter. See you in the next video.